Joining us now, Admiral Thad Allen, Senior Vice President at Booz Allen Hamilton. Thank you for joining us again.
My pleasure.
You are the foremost expert in the region of the Gulf Coast, unfortunately, because it's been so hard hit, whether it was Katrina, Rita, the Deepwater Horizon spill. What do you want the public to know about what's happening post those disasters in that region today?
Well, I think everybody needs to understand that what makes the Gulf unique is the convergence of a lot of natural phenomena, natural environment and habitats with a lot of man-built, human-built environment. And the interaction of those two environments is increasing in complexity. We have climate change, huge amount of natural resources associated with that region. Just creates a huge convergence of issues, passion, local populations, and a lot of issues we need to be concerned about the environment.
What does the future hold for that area? Is it particularly vulnerable to get another disaster?
Well, I think we've seen from Hurricane Sandy that all coastal populations are at risk right now with climate change. We see increasing frequency of severe weather events. I think the country needs to be focused on resiliency, community resiliency, and individual resiliency.
What do you mean by that?
It's the ability to withstand an event, recover from it, and move on with the rest of your life or the community's future, and to build in and advance the social capital among the people, the infrastructure that allows you to be able to withstand these events and recover from them more quickly.
Of those three disasters we mentioned, is there one where you think the community did that more readily than in another situation?
Well, I think we learn each time. If you have populations that are at risk, if you have high density populations, underserved populations, those are pre-existing events, but their conditions are exacerbated by the storm, the oil spill, or whatever. And I think what we really need to focus on is what we can do in advance. I equate it to the human immune system. If you get sick and you have a low immune system, you're going to be much worse off than if you had a high immune system. Resiliency is the community equivalent of immunity.
What can we do specifically to lessen the impact of these disasters in advance?
First of all, we need to understand the complexity of the environments we live in. If you're in a floodplain, you should know that. You should know the risk associated with it. There's insurance you can buy. You can mitigate the effects of water by raising your house. I think we haven't done as good a job as we can about communicating that and then changing behavior.
Is it a challenge to get the private sector and the public sector to work together? What specific challenges are you facing in making that happen?
I don't believe so. In fact, I think it's a national imperative. There is no complex issue we deal with in the world today that can be addressed by a single government agency or a private sector firm. You have to work across boundaries, and there is a role for the private sector and the public sector. I worked extensively with the private sector across the different issues that I dealt with, and it's really insightful for me to now be on the non-government side and creating solutions out there where they can be more readily brought to market, and so I'm doing that now.
You've dealt with a variety of major challenges and disasters from September 11th on forward. What do you see as the biggest challenges coming our way in the future? I mean, what's the number one kind of risk you want to focus on facing our country?
I don't think there's a single risk. I think what we need to understand is we're facing uncertainty. Things are going to happen that we didn't plan on, either in severity or in terms of the event itself. You can think about an earthquake, you can think about a tidal wave, and you can think about a nuclear meltdown. It was inconceivable they would happen simultaneously, but it happened in Japan. I think going forward, what we need to figure out is how to create leaders and societies that can adapt when something happens, even if it's unanticipated.
When you were Admiral in the Coast Guard, you were focused on man-made disasters mostly, were you not?
Well, I think there's an interaction of the human-built and the natural environments. As we build out infrastructure and populations increase, what used to be isolated events of nature now interact with infrastructure, and it causes a lot more severity in some cases or consequences that we had not considered.
That's what I meant to ask is, at the beginning of your career, did you imagine that natural disasters would take on such urgency? I mean, it seems the military often is focused on man-made conflict.
Well, severe hurricanes back in those days happened once a decade or even more. The frequency of violent weather, that includes tornadic activity in the spring and fall, wildfire, seismic activities, they're all increasingly part of our daily life and they interact with the environment that we have built, and we really need to understand that better.
What's your theory on why we are seeing a greater frequency of those kinds of disasters?
Well, as we build more infrastructure and the populations increase, there's a greater contact with the natural environment. I don't think we always understand that when we built large public work projects in the 20s and 30s. I think now we need to come to grips that when we're going to build infrastructure, we need to think about resiliency and what might happen to that infrastructure when we build it.
So here at the plenary session, what will be your chief message you want to share with members here today?
I'll be moderating a panel, and we're going to look at the convergence of issues in the Gulf Coast. And we talked about some of those previously, whether they're man-made conditions that are down there, the natural conditions in the Gulf, the impacts of effluents coming down the Mississippi River, loss of barrier islands. It's a very, very complicated area and a very important area to the United States. And I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Before you go, has the Gulf Coast been made whole? Has it fully recovered from this series of disasters?
I'm not sure you're ever going to get to a point where you fully recover because the starting point for each event was different. I think we need to learn how to move forward after one of these events and mitigate future events, whether that's building higher houses, strengthening our infrastructure, making the public more aware of what they need to do in advance of these events. That's what we need to do moving forward, is create national resiliency.
And are you of the belief that some of these disasters are partly man-made?
Well, I don't want to get into the argument about climate change. All I know is when I was commandant and we were dealing with issues in the Arctic, I said, I'm agnostic to the science. There's water where there didn't used to be, and I'm responsible for it. So whether it's being caused by events, and you can argue about that, the fact of the matter is there are changes going on in our environment. We have to adapt to that.
Admiral Thad Allen, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.